technical people are ready? Yes. Because we have... okay. We are very happy to welcome all of you here today for this seminar on Norway's aid engagement in complex and conflict-affected situations. My name is Anita Hasli, and I'm a senior advisor at the Department for Evaluation here in NORAD. Our department is located in NORAD and mandated to initiate and carry out independent evaluations of any activity financed over the Norwegian aid budget. We in the Department for Evaluation have, during the last years, conducted several evaluations about Norwegian engagement in countries where situations are complex, fragile, or conflict-affected. What we are asking in all these evaluations are, how can Norwegian aid navigate in such complex environments in an effective, sustainable, and conflict-sensitive way? In this seminar, we will discuss such issues based on a new report launched this Tuesday, an evaluation of the Norwegian engagement in the Sahel. Norwegian development aid to the Sahel dates back to the mid-1980s, focusing on food security in Mali and conflict mediation programs. In late 2017, Norway established its embassy in Bamako. This embassy assuming responsibility for Mali, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Chad, and Niger. This marked a notable shift in Norway's diplomatic representation in the region. In recent months, the Sahel region has witnessed significant changes. The evaluation completed its data collection in March 2023, and the report was written in May. But by June, we learned that the UN Stabilization mission in Mali, MINUSMA, would withdraw from Mali by the end of the year. And in July, we saw another coup in the region, this time in Niger. And as August concluded, news arrived that the Norwegian Embassy in Mali would close down by this year's end. In today's seminar, we want to reflect around the following questions. What do these unpredictable events signify for a donor like Norway? How should the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the aid administration adapt their Sahel strategy going forward? And what implications arise for Norway's implementing partners? How can these partners effectively assess and monitor their projects amid such volatility? And what lessons can Norway draw from its engagement in the Sahel that could be applied to other complex crises, such as the Ukraine crisis? These are questions that you in the audience can have swirling in the back and in front of your head throughout this seminar, and we hope that we together can reflect on and contribute to a deeper understanding of these issues. Briefly about the agenda for today's seminar. We will first hear about some of the findings from the evaluation, and then the department will present its recommendations. And after that, we will hear the State Secretary present the management response to the evaluation before we move on to a panel discussion exploring these issues in depth. So first, we will hear from the team that conducted this independent evaluation. The team leader, Ananda Millard, will present some key findings from the report. Please, Ananda, come forward to the stage. And while you find your place, I will introduce you. So Ananda Millard led the evaluation of the Norwegian aid engagement in the Sahel. She has a PhD in post-conflict reconstruction and has more than 25 years of experience in research and evaluation in the humanitarian and development sector. Her methodological expertise spans qualitative and quantitative research, including data collection and engagement with right holders in sensitive and complex environments. The floor is yours, Ananda.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, everybody. I think I'm unmuted now, so you should be hearing me okay. It's not working. I can try again. No. Now it's better? Yeah? No?
Yes, no.
Yes? Okay, good. That helps. Otherwise, I can yell. Anyway, pleasure to be joining you this morning. I will be speaking just for a few minutes about this assignment and some of our findings. But first also, of course, thank you to the evaluation department for having trusted us to do this and for having worked with us. And Aneta is over there and Javier is somewhere that I can't see. There he is, for having ushered this process. It has been quite a long one. We started last year at the end of the year, and most of the interviews for this were in February and March. So a number of you here in the room, we talked about some of these issues quite a long time before some of the changes that Anita mentioned. But I still hope that what we will talk about is relevant and interesting and thought-provoking. So just a few things about the assignment. The assignment had two different parts. We were looking at organizational management of the support provided, and then specifically to food security and food security support in Mali. And it was a team composed of myself and 4 other team members based in Europe at CMI and TANA, and then a national consultant based in Mali. So, a few words about the organizational management. I think the first thing to say is that when we look at what was done and the degree to which that was relevant and aligned with Norwegian strategies, and there were a few of them that we were looking at, the answer is yes, it was aligned. What you're doing in the Sahel was what you intended to do, so that's always good to hear, I guess. The other thing that we found, of course, and this is going to be no surprise to anybody here, is that access is really a multidimensional challenge. How do you reach the right holders that you're trying to support? How do you engage with the actors that you're trying to engage with? Who are those actors in some questions? So the good news is that you align with strategy. The harder news is that it's difficult to do that. And of course, in the discussion and questions, I can discuss a little bit more about what we talk about when we discuss alignment and access. But if we take a positive perspective and we say, what can we do to try to address some of these challenges, what we found was that coordination and synergies is one way and one of the tools that you have to try to meet some of these challenging circumstances. And that means coordinating amongst yourselves, the different agencies that provide this support. It means coordinating and supporting coordination between the actors that get the support, that are working with people on the ground. And then we were also looking at who do you partner with and what are the characteristics amongst those partners that are really important to have. So, and the list here, by the way, is not that everybody has to meet all of this criteria, okay? So I think that that's really important to say. But of course, that you have access to right holders, and not everybody does. So which kind of right holders are you trying to reach, and do you have access to them? Do you have an ability to check what it is that you're doing? Can you monitor what you're working on? Is there an ability to do that? Can you actively document lessons that you have? And we found that that's a really important thing, particularly in an environment that is changing so much and so quickly. People learn different things at different times, and are you figuring out what that is? And is it documented somewhere so that we can learn from it? Can you work within the nexus? And I think that that's also really important. These things are interlinked: development, humanitarian assistance, peace. They don't exist in different worlds. They exist in the same one, and how do they link to each other? And the last is, are there opportunities to strengthen government entities? And I use the word entity very loosely to say, you know, there are issues with many of the governments in this region, legitimacy issues and other questions. You just mentioned the coup recently in Niger. But that doesn't mean that the whole government structure can't be engaged with. And there are opportunities to work with offices, administrations, organizations, and certainly Norway has done that. You have identified different entities that are governmental bodies that you could work with. So if we talk then a little bit about food security specifically, and this was the kind of implementation theme that we were looking at. we are going to take a very positive perspective on this and say, yes, there's lots and lots of challenges, and we can spend all day talking about that. But if we say that the principal challenge can be put under the umbrella of complexity, it's very complex to work in these environments, then what can you do about this complexity? In food security, those that focus a little bit more on that, there are different dimensions to food security, how to ensure food security. And the first thing that we can say about Norwegian support is that Norway has been able to support these different dimensions of food security. That because of Norwegian support, right holders have had improved food security. So I think that that's also really important to say. But the other thing that we can say is that conflict sensitivity and cross-cutting issues and unintended effects need a little bit more close attention. And I think that what's important to say about all of this together is that, of course, after the fact, we can all point at the things that could have been done better. That's kind of part of the after the fact. And part of the being an evaluator is always easy to say, oh, but you should have done that. But I think that what we would say about this and the support that has been provided in this sector is that the achievements are notable. They can be documented. But we would like to focus on the things that next time around can be done a little bit better. And the first thing is synergies between actors and activities. There are a number of actors, not so many, a number that do have the ability to work in these contexts. And how do you link them up? And how do you support them talking to each other? And how do you make sure that the lessons that one learns are learned by the others as well, and that we don't utilize any effort at all in duplication? I think that that's a takeaway. It doesn't mean that anything was wrong per se. It just means, could it have been better? How much better? I don't know. I don't know. Does anybody know? But it could have been a little bit more improved, I think. So let me just say a few things about conclusions. And I think I have about 1.5 minutes left. So you have heard me say this in different ways. Did you achieve what you intended to? Yeah, and I really want to drive that home because I think that not just in the Sahel, but we've all been watching the news, is kind of really not so happy at the moment. So let's take a moment and say, you tried to do something through support to the Sahel and it has achieved something, and let's not forget that in the midst of everything else that is happening. Synergies and coordination are going to be a key, I think, in the Sahel and in other environments generally, but particularly environments that are complex. Understanding context, and I put there in parentheses real time. Things are changing so quickly that knowing what the Sahel was like, I almost feel standing here before you that I had all these conversations about the Sahel in March, and if I had those conversations today, they would be a little bit different. It wouldn't mean that what happened a year ago that we were looking at would have been different, but I think some of the reflections would have been different, and that to me really illustrates this need to have real-time context assessment, real-time systematic assessment of what does this mean to cross-cutting issues? What does it mean in terms of gender? What does it mean in terms of environment? What is happening? And I think that the only way to really do that successfully is to join as many forces as can, because that takes a lot of effort and energy to do. And I think that the last, and I want to underscore and end with that, is that there are a lot of different layers to the support to the Sahel, and all of these different layers are important. Political layers, diplomatic layers, and somewhere are right holders. And when we look at the support that was given to food security, a lot of it was directly to right holders. And I think that it's really important that that layer is very much in the attention of everybody here. We can say this government is not legitimate, and we might all agree on that, or this entity cannot be worked with. But somebody recently asked me, but why should Norway continue to support the Sahel? And my answer to that is because right holders, regardless of everything else that might be happening, are still in need. And the support that you have provided through food security has reached them. And that's really critical. Thank you very much. Ten minutes.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Ananda. You will join us in the panel discussion later. So, based on the findings from this report and feedback from stakeholders during the work and findings from previous evaluations, the Department for Evaluation formulates recommendations to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on how to improve the aid. And Annette Wilhelmsen, she has been the project leader for this evaluation from the Evaluation Department, and she will now present our recommendations that were sent to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Annette.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you so much, Ananda. It's been a pleasure working with you on this process, and I think the whole evaluation process has been very good. We in the evaluation department, we believe that the evaluation can provide valuable insights into how the organization of Norwegian assistance to countries in vulnerable situations in general and in the Sahel in particular can be improved. We also believe that the findings from the evaluation are relevant for the development of the ministry's Africa strategy. In addition, findings from the report, such as the challenges that Ananda raised about the organization and coordination of the Norwegian aid, may be relevant for the new planned division of labor between the ministry and NORAD. The report provides a good description of Norwegian engagement in the Sahel during the evaluation period, and this is confirmed by meetings with stakeholders during the evaluation process. The evaluation highlights certain characteristics of Norwegian aid that have been identified in several previous evaluations, such as the evaluation of Norwegian engagement in Somalia, in South Sudan, to support to education in crisis and conflict, and support for women, peace and security. The positive aspects include long-term commitments and flexibility towards Norway's partners, as well as good results in individual projects. Weaknesses are related to lack of coordination and the creation of synergies that can lead to better results. A lack of a systematic learning across projects, the lack of operationalization and implementation of cross-cutting issues, and conflict sensitivity, and also incomplete documentation of unintended effects. So based on the evaluation, feedback from stakeholders, and findings from previous evaluations, we recommend that the ministry in Norwegian engagement in the Sahel and in countries in vulnerable situations in the future consider the following 3 recommendations. So I'll put them up for you here. Yep. So the first recommendation is that procedures for improved coordination between the ministry, NORAD, and the embassy should be further developed. This includes strengthening existing mechanisms for internal coordination, planning for regular meetings with external actors for information exchange, but also for coordination of efforts. Facilitating and exploring opportunities to require partners to better coordinate with each other where there is geographic and thematic overlap to ensure a more coherent effort. The second recommendation is that a guide should be developed to promote a common understanding of how cross-cutting issues should be operationalized and implemented in Norway's aid engagement, both within the aid administration and among partners. Furthermore, partners should be required to report on how this is done in practice. The third and final recommendation is that the ministry should facilitate systematic work on conflict sensitivity and risk assessments in both aid administration and among partners. This includes that Norway's engagement should be based on conflict and risk assessments, including planning for different scenarios in the context. Basic guidance should be developed for how conflict sensitivity and unintended effects should be operationalized and reported on by partners. Norway should also require partners to use up-to-date conflict analysis and report on how projects have been conflict sensitive and on whether any unintended effects have been identified. So these were our 3 recommendations which have been sent to the ministry. And these are publicly available on our website together with the management response from the ministry and the evaluation reports, where all our reports are publicly available. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anette. And when the Department for Evaluation has sent the evaluation report and the recommendations to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the MFA can write a management response to the recommendations stating whether and how they will intend to follow up on the findings and the recommendations. And we are very happy to welcome Bjørge Sandkjær, the State Secretary for the Ministry of International Development, here today. Please. She will now present the Ministry's response to the findings and the recommendations. The floor is yours, State Secretary.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Great to see so many people. So?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's try again. Yes. Good morning, everyone, and thanks. Great to see so many people up early to talk about a very important part of the world and a very important region for Norwegian engagement. And thanks also for a very good evaluation that gives us valuable insights and thoughts. And thanks, Ananda, for presenting the key findings for us here this morning. And thanks, of course, also to the Department of Evaluation in NORAD for producing this very, very good and thorough report. I don't need to tell people in this room that the Sahel region is going through big changes. Even since the end of the data collection period for the evaluation, so much has happened. We've seen another coup, this time in Niger. We've seen the calls from MINUSMA to withdraw from Mali. We've seen an escalation of violence in the whole region, as well as the increasingly dire situation for the population, not least the humanitarian situation. It's a very challenging context now for engagement in the Sahel region. But evaluations like this give us that opportunity to pause, to think, and to assess how we best can engage in vulnerable and complex contexts, such as the region that we are talking about. So we do take note of the findings and welcome the recommendations also that were presented here. It may not be a surprise to you that we are very happy with the overall conclusion that Norwegian assistance is relevant, and it's relevant to the Sahelian context in several ways. One thing is the alignment with Norwegian priorities, with policies and political priorities, but most importantly, that it's relevant to the most pressing needs of the rights holders in the region that we are talking about. And I noticed in the report, as well as in the presentation, how the evaluation finds that support to food security, which is such an important priority for us, food security in Mali, has reached the targeted population and has showed that improving food security is possible despite the challenges that are present in Mali and in the Sahel region. We also note that the Ministry's Sahel strategy remains relevant, together with other reference documents, and have ensured a more conflict-sensitive and coherent approach. We also note that there is room for improvement. I think evaluations give us that possibility to look at where we can improve, and it would be maybe surprising if there was no room for improvement. So it's good to see that and it's also clearly that there is direction in where we need to improve, for example, in internal and external coordination. So in response, you can say that we will develop to be better and develop better routines for coordination between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, between NORAD and relevant embassies and other partners. I also noted that many of the findings of the evaluation are systemic and not specific to the Sahel. So the findings and recommendations will be used to improve how we work not only in this region, but in other conflict-affected regions as well. So let me just say a little bit about what we're doing now and moving forward. You know that we are in the process of reassessing our approach in the Sahel region. In August, you may have noticed that we announced that we will be closing our embassy in Bamako. It was not an easy decision to make, but it was taken after reviewing whether it was possible to safeguard Norwegian interests given the security situation in the country. But closing our embassy in Bamako does not mean that Norway is pulling out of the Sahel. We will continue to be engaged, not least through the humanitarian efforts. And we're very concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the region. So we're very pleased to be able to announce 40 million Norwegian kroner to the humanitarian response in the region. Will be allocated now. But the structure and organization of our engagement is under consideration. Some of the key issues we need to address are the ones addressed in the evaluation as well, and have to do with coordination. But at least our decisions will be based on a solid understanding of the context at both country and regional level. And we depend on having that information, although we won't have that presence that we had through our embassy. And that means that working with partners will be even more important. So the findings of the evaluation will inform the current reassessment of our engagement in the Sahel. And I look forward to listening also to thoughts and inputs on how we best organize our work in the region to maintain our long-term commitment to the rights holders, to the civilian population of a vulnerable region on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary. Now we will have a very brief comment from Norway's ambassador to Mali, which we are lucky to have here. So can we welcome Rigmor? Where did she go? Ah, there you are. Hi, Lena. Please. Yes, please come. Rigmor Kuti has been Norway's ambassador to Mali since 2022, and before that she served as the special representative for the Sahel.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to be brief, so I'll try to be very brief. But first of all, let me thank the evaluation team for a very good report, and thank the State Secretary as well for very good comments. I would like to make 3 points. First, as has been said, the context in the Sahel is rapidly changing. We are closing our embassy by the 1st of December. MINUSMA is pulling out and will be out of the country by the 31st of December. The violence in the north is getting worse and worse. the signatories to the peace agreement, have taken weapons and are now in the midst of a war in the northern Mali. And as has been said, we have had a coup in Niger, and the situation there is also very challenging. So the context is changing, the civilian population is suffering, and it's getting more and more difficult to be able to assist. My second point is that in the continuation, we as a donor country and the partners will have to look for opportunities, but also be willing to take even bigger risks. It is getting more and more complicated to do what we want to do. Large parts of the region, the Sahel region, not only Mali, is getting more and more difficult to access. People are fleeing to neighboring countries, and it is more and more complicated for the different organizations to really plan what to do, because the situation is so rapidly changing. This brings me to my final point. I think it is very important for us to set realistic objectives. We must look through the objectives that we set, and we will have to be flexible in order to readjust to a situation that is changing. We will also have to depend more and more on local partners, local employees, who are those who are willing to take the risk to go to the difficult areas and who are most apt to actually do something because they understand the situation better than foreigners. So I think that is it's a reality we have to adapt to, and it will also make it more complicated, as has been said, for us to follow up on projects. That goes for the ministry, of course, as we're closing the embassy, sorry, but also for the partners. So that is also a risk that we need to take. And let me just end by saying thank you, a big thank you to the partners who are in the Sahel, and to their local employees who are really doing a tough job these days. We depend on them to be able to assist, and the people in the Sahel really needs partners these days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will now move on to a panel discussion. We will rearrange a little bit here, and we are very fortunate to have an excellent panel here with us today. Let me invite you to take your seats on the stage, and while they get seated, I will introduce the panelists. Ananda Millard, we introduced earlier. As you remember, she's the team leader for this evaluation. And then we have Anne-Katrine Seland from the Norwegian Church Aid. She served as the Norwegian Church Aid's country director for the operations in Mali and Burkina Faso from 2018 to 2023. She has extensive experience from working with civil society organizations. Elisabeth Schwabe Hansen is director.
Jeg blir så nervøs av den stolen. Sorry.
Very good risk management. Thank you. So Elisabeth Schwabe Hansen is director and head of section for the Horn of Africa and West Africa in the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs since October 2020. Schwabe Hansen has worked extensively on issues related to the peace, development and humanitarian nexus, including coordinating the development of the strategic framework for Norway's engagement in conflict prevention, stabilization and resilience building. And then we have Yuri Nossum, the director for the Nansen Support Program for the Ukraine in NORAD. And finally, we have with us Ornella Moderan, whom we will hear from first. She is participating digitally, if everything is working correctly. Ornella Moderan is an independent researcher and policy advisor on political and security dynamics in the Sahel and West Africa. Her background includes working with civil society to help structure societal demand for security sector accountability in conflict-affected West African countries, and she has led a major humanitarian program in Mali and coordinated community-level peace-building program in the Liptako-Gourma borderlands. She has also worked with national governments and international organizations, supporting strategy development and stakeholder engagement initiatives. She has a background as the head of the Sahel program and the Bamako office of the Institute of Security Studies in 2020, and has now joined the conflict research unit of the Klingendale Institute. She is also an associate fellow at the Africa program of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. Ornella also served as an external advisor to the evaluation department for this evaluation. So, please, Ornella, we would like to ask you, how does aid interact with the conflict economy, and how can a donor like Norway systematize and operationalize conflict sensitivity in aid?
Thank you very much, Anita, for this question. I hope you can all hear me well.
Yes, yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So your question takes us right into the hot part of this topic, I think. While humanitarian aid is essential for saving lives in conflict environments, its interactions with the conflict economies can be complex and multifaceted. In the Sahel, this complexity is made even more difficult by the fact that it is extremely difficult for humanitarian actors and donors to systematically identify the very specific and different ways in which humanitarian aid can interact with conflict economies. And these may include, systemic effects such as the distortion of local markets or worsening of resources, competition locally, or long-term disruptions like a dependency syndrome. Or it could also be opportunistic effects, such as the provision of incentives to local armed groups or aid resources exploitation by corrupt local officials or intermediaries. These risks play out in different manners, in different contexts, and it takes really dedicated analysis, like Rigmond was saying, in order to improve the way we adjust, the way we adapt. So what does this look like in practice? Maybe let me give you a couple of examples. I think at the political level first, the current context of coups and military transitions in the Sahel region really create a dilemma with the risk that continued engagement could help undemocratic governments legitimize themselves, but at the same time, the risk that withdrawing completely will surely expose thousands of lives. So here we have a conundrum. We have a clear dilemma. And one of the lessons I think other like-minded donors to Norway have drawn in this context is that working in stabilization in fragile and unstable environments like this really require flexibility to adapt while remaining engaged through hard times like currently. Now, at the operational level, the types of interactions we see and how this connects to conflict sensitivity takes many different shapes. I'll just give you two examples from my own experience. First example, imagine a remote area in the Timbuktu region where local elites insist that due to their own social leadership role and the fine knowledge they have of locals' social structures, they should be the ones to identify aid beneficiaries. And this is a situation we see often when aid is being delivered with many intermediaries. Now, looking at it more closely, what the program I was leading at the time found is that these elites actually were corrupt and were trying to use this power to identify beneficiaries as a way to favor their own clienteles locally and to support their political power. So, of course, that does not tell us what to do, but my point is we really need to have conflict analysis in order to even identify the problem. Another example, and this will be my second and last, and I will stop here for now. has to do with acknowledging the political economy implications of deploying humanitarian assistance in certain hard-to-reach areas. Again, from my experience, in parts of central and northern Mali, for instance, only certain types of vehicles are able to access certain areas without being immediately attacked or stolen. And these are typically rental vehicles which belong to local warlords. So the conundrum for humanitarian actors at very operational and practical levels becomes, well, do we still rent vehicles from these actors, even if that means feeding into their finances? Or do we actually just stop going there, even if that means failing rights holders from these areas? So again, the answer is not easy, and it may depend on various factors, but what is important to note is that the discussion cannot even happen if we don't take the time to identify the problem, and the problem is unlikely to be identified without a sound context analysis and local conflict analysis.
Thank you. Thank you, Nella. This is very interesting examples of how the context is important to understand in order to be able to have a conflict-sensitive aid. So, but how does all these things match? How do you navigate the conflict sensitivity and the need for working more locally with the local organizations and locally led development? Can you reflect a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. I think, these are really the two sides of one coin, the whole localization conversation and the conflict sensitivity conversation. As one of my predecessors here mentioned, it is critical to work with local partners who hold fine and refine local knowledge and understanding of what conflict dynamics, but also economic dynamics and power dynamics really look like on the ground. So it's important, I think, to think of the localization agenda not just as a way to pass on responsibility to other types of implementers, but also to draw on a vast reserve of local knowledge. And this means that, working with local NGOs and local actors to deliver aid should not just be a type of logistical shift. It should really be approached as a new way of partnering in order to draw local information and local understanding, while also providing local partners with the tools to actually turn the knowledge they have into programmatic and useful programming assessments. So I think here there is really a win-win to be built between what local actors have to bring in terms of what they experience and know of the local context, which may be much more difficult for remote actors to have, and the fact that, well, sometimes what they do miss and can use foreign support with is the tools and the guidance and the methodology and the systematic approach to turning that knowledge into programmatic assessments, programmatic information that is useful to determine how you approach this situation. So I really think that these are the two sides of the same coin.
But is it your opinion that this is not done well enough now?
So it's not so much it's not so much my opinion, but what the report says, and I think the report is right on this, as on many other things. But the report indicates that on the one hand, Norway acknowledges all of this, the importance of conflict sensitivity and so on, but tends in the context of the Sahel to pass on this responsibility to implementing partners without providing specific guidance, which of course is not very effective, because as we know, there is built in the aid structure incentives for partners to report positively and to say they have done things, even if it's difficult to do. So it would be interesting to really try and build these tools and these this type of support and training and so on,
Yes.
to make sure that partners are really able to do what we're asking them to do.
Yes, thank you. So we will move on to Anne-Katrine Seland. You have been based in the Sahel for a number of years. How important is knowledge about the context in order to be able to deliver aid in the region? How should knowledge on the context impact the aid that we deliver?
Yeah. Norwegian Church Aid, we're working both in development, humanitarian, and peace. So it's what we call the nexus, but we would call it that what we do, we're really building resilience. And a lot has been said about the complexity of what's going on in the region. I think I just want to stress two other things. It's that it's very centralized states with, for different reasons, the state apparatus is quite weak. So whatever is happening in Bamako in the national level is not necessarily impacting at the regional level and not in the community, which means that really you have to go and find out what's going on in the communities where you want to work. And at the same time, yes, very much is changing every day things are changing. But on the other hand, nothing is changing. And I think that this also you have to take into consideration the tradition, the culture, the really heavy structures that you can build on, that hampers, but also you have to know if you want to do positive change. So when you want to have a positive change in a given community, you really have to know what's going on. You have to know the formal structures, the informal structures, power, hierarchy, what are the marginalized groups, how to both gain access, acceptance, anchoring, sustainability, but at the same time giving voice to the marginalized groups. And the way we are working then is to work with local partners, as local as possible, that have this contextual knowledge. But I think what Ananda also and Ornella was saying, it's important to update it and to question it all the time. And to dare, and I think that is important. I think I would recommend as a fourth recommendation from the evaluation department is maybe how can we be in a sort of safe space where we as partners with you could dare to tell you what is not working. Because I'm not sure if I would dare to do that right now, Elizabeth. I would like to, but of course there are things that are not working. This is a complex context. So, but I could give you some example how we work concretely. For example, when COVID hit in Mali in 2020, due to the fact that we had local partners already working in the different regions and local staff, we were able to very rapidly provide hand washing stations, water, soap. You can't talk about COVID if you're washing hands if you don't have water and soap. But at the same time, also diffusing radio messages, local radio channels in the local languages, with the messages given by religious traditional leaders that people were listening to. And I think that we were able to respond rapidly because we had that knowledge already. So that's a very concrete example of how the context, knowing the context, will give you better results. We have another project now, I think is very interesting, where we work on peace and livelihood, where we are mapping out in the communities where we're working, what are the rights holders' needs? What are the challenges? But not more importantly, I think, what are the resources? Because when you know the context, you know also what are the resources that you can build on. And what are the power structures? Of course, what are the conflicts, but how are they solved at the moment? What can we strengthen in what is already working? And where can we contribute for the changes that are needed?
And you're talking about conflicts on community level.
Community level, yeah. We're working on the community level. So, going forward, there are two things I think that would be important for us in that project, is that we have to anticipate the changes. Hopefully it gets better, but what when it gets worse, or if it gets worse? I think that also, we at our level, Norway at different levels, like you have to anticipate the different scenarios. And what do we do then in this project? And what do we do then?
We will come back to scenario thinking, but you're mentioning that how you are working locally with local partners to give you a contextual knowledge that makes it possible for you to adapt your programming using this contextual knowledge. So I will like to move on to Elisabeth and ask a little bit about how, now that the embassy is closing, how can we still ensure that access to and sharing of contextual knowledge is shared among all of us working there?
Well, I think I'd like to go back to Ambassador Coulty's intervention and just underline the need for increasing contact and reliance on local partners and our partners in general. And as you, I'd like to thank all our partners for the good collaboration that we have. I wish you had sensed that there was a safe space. I think we would like to make sure that there is, because those are exactly the kinds of conversations that we need to have. And I think what we will do from the ministry side is we recognize that we need to take on a much stronger coordinating role in ensuring that we bring all the partners together and that we have conversations that are, obviously we cannot do that at the local level, but we can engage with you at the regional level and at headquarter level and make sure that we do have open and frank conversations. And I think that that goes always. So we need to be open about our challenges and we would highly appreciate that you are open and candid with us. So I think that's one key. The whole localization debate, I think, was very well laid out by previous speakers, and we subscribe to that, and we'll have to ensure how can we work even more closely. This is an issue that we're now also facing in the Sudan, where those who actually are able to deliver on the ground are the local neighborhood committees. So how do you work with those kinds of in those kinds of contexts? We also do need to, we already have quite an extensive multilateral cooperation on the Sahel. There's a like-minded group. We have a special envoy. We have to engage in those kinds of fora as well to make sure that we share understanding there. So there's a Sahel Alliance for the aid. There's a Sahel Coalition for the more political side. In addition, there is a network for all the envoys. And you, amongst the humanitarians and the development organizations, you also have your own networks. How do we make sure that we share inputs from all these different so that we together might be able to piece together a picture. Some of the country risks involved, we need to understand on several different levels, from the security to the political risks. Some of these pose dilemmas for us. I think Ornella already mentioned some of it. But we do need to also work with research institutions and think tanks. So you have the Institute for Security Studies and their office in Dakar have provided very good reports that provide some certain understanding of some of the dynamics on the security side. We need to use those reports and others much more systematically in our work. And we do need to have some kind of country strategy that lays out priorities. The problem if you write extensive context analysis in those is that they are very quickly outdated. So the idea is to have this running conversation rather than sort of fixed documents that you have to update every now and then.
But will you have these running conversations and updated context knowledge and make sure to coordinate this better in the future? Or do you have any?
We will have to create those kinds of mechanisms. We already have it on a more, I would say, ad hoc basis. But what we do need to do is to systematize it before. So we've had the Big Sahel Forum. That's been running for quite a couple of years. That is a forum which is too large to have these kinds of conversations. So we need to have smaller spaces as well where you can have these more sensitive conversations. And that's something that we will initiate, but we also welcome proposals from partners. And then there are some new advantages after COVID and new technology is that it makes it easier for us to connect also across time zones and geographical space.
Yes, and are there any lessons from this evaluation that you find relevant for for your work and your engagement in other conflict-affected situations? Just briefly. If you
Well,
want
the
to.
issues of conflict sensitivity definitely is how do you assess the risks, and the risks are at very different levels. So you have the risk for results, is the risk of not doing anything versus the risk of that which you do having unintended consequences, or even disappearing overnight, which can also happen. So there's a high risk involved at many different levels. The staff risks is one issue, both for your staff, for our staff. These are our considerations that we will have to take all the time. I think it's also necessary to remember the whole do no harm principle. Some of the interventions at the local level, particularly using through local partners, when engaging also in the more sensitive areas, are we putting them at risk? Are we increasing their vulnerability? I mean, these are issues that we really do need to look carefully about. The issue surrounding safeguarding of humanitarian principles is incredibly important, particularly when operating in these kinds of spaces where you have to negotiate your access. So if there is a blurring of lines too much, if you mix some of the interventions, particularly well-intended interventions around durable solutions for displaced populations, for instance, might very easily come into some kind of contradiction with delivery of humanitarian aid as well. So we need to be always conscious about these things. And then finally, the coordination issues are universal, not just for Sahel, not just for Norway, but something that we will continue to struggle with, even though we now have some very good concrete recommendations to work with.
Thank you. Yes. So then we will move on to Jorunn Nossum. And since you are heading the department that is managing Norway's massive development aid to Ukraine and humanitarian aid, what do you see as important lessons from the Norwegian engagement in the Sahel that can be useful in the engagement in Ukraine?
No, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So first, you could think that is this of relevance to Ukraine at all? And I think Elizabeth ended that very well by saying that some of these challenges are quite universal, and that is absolutely right. So when we in June got sort of the responsibility of managing the program was transferred from the ministry to NORAD, the first thing we said that could we learn from other experience that we have? This is a new program. It's an enormous program. And also for NORAD, a new region, not for the ministry, but for us it's quite a new region. But that doesn't mean that there are not relevant experiences and lessons to be learned from other regions, other contexts, other periods of time. So, and I think also the report, but also the discussion here pretty much sort of confirmed that. So we said that definitely we're gonna do mistakes. We're gonna end up, having an evaluation that has some findings that are not in our favor, but at least let's try at least to look at what we have already collected from other program supports, and let's try to do new mistakes then. So that was one thing. But just to mention a few areas, I think on the strategic alignment. Yes, we have quite sort of direct strategic, priorities. There has been some very sort of strategic decisions made. So so far we are quite aligned with them, but we have all the same challenges that has been sort of mentioned here, and that you introduced but also that was followed up by Amela, like coordination issues. You also mentioned them to be universal. The whole issue of access. The whole issue of all the dilemmas that occurs when such sort of the international presence here. I was there last week, talked to the UN resident coordinator. The UN system there is now with 3,000 staff. There's 750 organizations working in Ukraine at the moment. So, of course, a lot of them are local, but also a lot of them are international. So what that does to sort of the whole response totally, the application was mentioned. There are so many challenges here. And I was thinking about that this morning, that even if we are aware of them, and even if we read all these reports and findings and conclusions, it's not like these challenges are disappearing.
No.
So there will always be these risks and these challenges, even if we are aware of them and try to sort of adapt to that. But we have some advantages. Or we have one advantage. This is quite a new program. So we are sort of starting, not from scratch, but building a program. This is not a program, not that we ever do that, but this is not a program where we take, all kinds of existing somehow older agreements and arrangements and put them together under a new heading. I didn't say that we do that, but at least we don't do that now. So that has some. Of course, it's a huge challenge because it's a large response. So there are many things that needs to be established and built up in a very short time. But there are also some advantages of starting from sort of scratch. But then I think one of the recommendations here particularly important, because what the report says is that, yeah, you do see quite many results on sort of a project level or activity level, but where is sort of the holistic response? What can we say about the holistic response to this region? And I was thinking about that also for the Nansen program. Even if there is a program, there are some overall direction, but at the same time, we do also risk that sort of situation where we will see lots of results, a little bit here and something there. But what can we say in a few years' time that has been sort of the Norwegian response in total? And I think that is a challenge. Just want to mention one more thing, and that is about learning, evaluation, and so on. So that's also what we said. Let's really build that in from the start, and it was also given us as an assignment from the ministry to sort of make a plan for that. So we have made quite an ambitious plan on that, built in sort of real-time evaluation, learning loops, a lot of things that we are, at least that's our own assessment, more ambitious than we normally are. So we were quite happy with that, and we delivered that to the ministry last month. And now it's still just a plan. So our challenge now is, of course, to implement that plan. But I think we have put a lot of learning from previous sort of programs, other regions, previous experience into quite an ambitious plan on how we can make sure that we learn, adjust, and try to build that into the program support as we go. But of course, a good plan, but still only a plan. And I must also say at the end, because that's what I always say, yes, we would like to discuss and hear about all the good stuff that we are doing, but we need to hear about the challenges, definitely. So I hope that safe space is there. And that's really what we as NORAD at least trying to communicate to all our partners, that we need to have that sort of safe space, as you call it, to really raise those challenges, because obviously they are there. And if we cannot discuss them, then we have a challenge.
Yes.
So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. Ananda, after having heard the ministry's response and all the comments from the panelists, do you have any observations?
Thank you,
Yes.
everybody. Very interesting.
Yeah, turn on.
Is it better now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, a couple of things. I definitely agree with what has been said. I think that the issue about context, you're absolutely right. Some things stay the same, but some things change. There's a couple of things I would like to highlight. Ambassador Cote also mentioned risk. So, and the lessons learned and evaluators and what's a bad result. I have been an evaluator now for like 14 years. Before that, I was a researcher in this sector. I think that we have a little bit of fear of we didn't do what we intended to. And I see this a lot as an evaluator, that I say, well, you did this thing, it wasn't what you wanted to, but it's really interesting. Oh my gosh, please don't write that. And we are not just in the Sahel, in many environments working in extremely difficult, complex, volatile places. If it goes exactly the way you did it, all the time, you were playing it super safe. Okay? And then the question should be, was that really the only thing you wanted to do? I think there's a flip side to that. And I'm not winning any popularity contest for saying these kinds of things right now. But I think that if Norway wants to work in the Sahel and Ukraine in so many of these contexts, some things are going to go wrong sometimes. And we should all know that from the beginning, and you should be glad when they get found out. Because then it means something can be done about it. You can say, okay, we have a lesson there. Lessons are really good. And those of you that have had an opportunity to look at these reports saw somewhere in there that it says, lessons are not documented a lot. They're not documented systematically. I cannot speak for the organizations because I do not work for them. But I have seen this a lot, and I think that the reason is because they are concerned that if I say, lessons are often seen as failure. No, lesson is not failure. You thought this was going to go this way. It didn't. We learn, we adapt, we do something else. So I think that there is a little bit of a conflict there. I think that Norway historically has wanted to work in these environments. I think that you should continue to work in these environments. I have this discussion a lot in relation to corruption and anti-corruption. And I understand politically why it's very important to have very strict position on that. But if you want zero corruption all the time, then there's a lot of places you cannot ever work because at some point it's going to happen. Yeah. Yes. And so I think these are challenges, and I'm glad to hear that there is awareness around that, and I'm glad to hear that there is an open discussion about it. And when we, in the report, talk about synergies and coordination, we're trying to get to that. Let's have an open discussion about what didn't work.
I think that's a very interesting point, and it also touches upon what several of you mentioned, that there are real dilemmas in working in such environments. And I think we should try to discuss that a little bit more, but I think we should take a very few questions, quick questions from the audience and bring with us back to finalizing the panel sessions. So do we have a microphone? Yes, yes. Can you please state your name and be brief?
Yes, my name is Birgit Philipsen and I'm from ADRA, Norway. We work with education in Sahel. And we have noticed that there's a lot of recommendations here that might be a little bit irrelevant now since the embassy is closing. So we are just wondering if there has been put any thought into what now, the way forward when it comes to the coordination, the lessons learned and so on, practical steps to take when we no longer have an embassy or will have an embassy to coordinate some of this work on the ground.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Question here in the front.
Thank you very much. I'm Ragnhild Norvik from Redd Barna, or Save the Children, Norway. First of all, huge thanks for it's a really interesting evaluation, and I really like this discussion, and thank you guys for raising so many things. I just wanted to mention one thing, because I completely agree that there is a lot to learn from our humanitarian and development responses in other contexts to Ukraine. The two things that might be a bit different is, one, that Ukraine has a very strong state, and the second is funding. There are huge needs in Ukraine, but it's also a very well-funded response for now. I mean, there is a lot of support. And I think I couldn't agree more with what Ornella, you mentioned some of these concrete dilemmas we stand in, what do we do when we rent this car, the other car? But the other huge thing with working in contexts such as Sahel is cost. I mean, just in Niger before the coup, when there was a state of emergency in several of the states where we operate as Save the Children, and it was banned the use of motorcycles. And that's how our local partners, that's how our local staff are able to visit communities. So many communities you couldn't visit, but then also if you want to visit, if you cannot go in a motorcycle, you need a car. Cars are super expensive. So it's also about that we really need to see that working in these environments has a huge cost, in addition to the risk willingness that was mentioned by the ambassador. So my question is also that, really, will both NORAD and NMFA see, and hopefully the parliament when they vote on the budget, but that's a different discussion, see the need for that? And just for the invitation to give input on how we can better coordinate, we will definitely see that, because it is complex, because we work in thematic sections, both in our organizations as well as in NORAD and NMFA, and on Sahel, I think, without exaggerating, I think we have contact with maybe 10, 15 people across the ministry and NORAD, on everything from attacks on education, Safe Schools Declaration advocacy, programmatic support, humanitarian support, the regional desk. So it's not easy, but we're really looking forward to seeing how we can improve together. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will wrap up this session, even though we have a lot of issues on the table, and you will have like 1 minute each, I think, and we will start in reverse order. So Jorunn, do you have something else you want to add?
No, yeah, inspired by the level.
Oh, your microphone.
Yes, no, inspired by the last speaker, also pointing at a few aspects that are different in the Ukraine context. And I think that is precisely also why learning from other contexts are important, because this might be a context where we can actually do something about that. You mentioned this, the strong state structures. So what we have seen from many other conflict areas, that you are establishing parallel structures for implementation, etc. And you know, the disadvantages of doing that. But here we are in a situation where we shouldn't do that, and we cannot. I mean, we are also in a situation where we don't have to do that. So drawing on those lessons and experience is still quite relevant within this context. And the other thing I also wanted to mention, and particularly from your introduction, Ornella, it's on the localization. The whole debate around that and how we use local organization, I think that is extremely important for the Norwegian response, because so far, and that will probably continue, but we have decided to work through, you know, big multilateral, like the banks, the UN system, and huge, large international NGOs. But of course, the local organizations here and their responsibility and possibility to access other areas, to understand the context, etc., and also a very strong civil society sector in the country. I think maybe those two things are the things that I would end with. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Elisabeth, you want to?
Sure. Just a couple of things. I think just to pick up on one key issue which has been raised here and was so well put by Ornella, is the key dilemma when working in countries like this is precisely how do you relate to the government and how do you relate to the government structures. And it is because you are faced with a political dilemma, a diplomatic dilemma, particularly if there is no agreement on the constitutional status of the government, so to speak. But you have to find ways around it. And we have a policy on the Norwegian side that we always engage regardless. So we don't cut off relations. But there's a big difference between engaging in a diplomatic sector and putting funding right through governmental structures when you have these questionable or difficult contexts, I would say. So that's one issue. However, working at local level, is you always should strive to try and see how to work with local administrations to make sure that there is a long-term effect as well. But these are incredibly difficult issues, and if you're going to do it, you always need to be aware of the political economy. And we see that in case after case in all of these issues. So just on the two concrete questions, we don't think that the recommendations are impossible to implement. Yes, they are more difficult to implement, but it means that we have to look closer at more centralized coordination structures. You will always, and this goes to your question, I think it will always be necessary to relate to different sectors, particularly on the programmatic side, and obviously there are those who have the agreements you have to relate to. But I do think in contexts like this, where we do need to be talking about the political, the humanitarian, the development all together, I think the regional desk needs to take a stronger coordinating role and make sure that some of the partners meet. And then obviously this will be much more challenging in the field. And we'll have to think creatively about how to do that, and would welcome your proposals. So I look forward to continued conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne-Katrine?
Yeah. Is it on? No.
Yes, it's
Yes,
on.
okay. Thank you. Yeah. I think just to stress something that Rigmor said, thank you. I think it's important to not be overly ambitious. That's the first thing. And also to think that this is going to last probably for a long time. So whatever you're doing now, you have to think about how can I build on something that can last? How can I build on a local resource if possible? Because this will probably take a very, very long time. To as I said before, to anticipate, hopefully that things will improve, but if they don't improve, what to do then? And it said a lot about flexibility, and I think it has to be looked into how can that be translated into the practical ways we're working with results framework, because something happens there. The minister or whatever, you can say, oh yeah, we're going to be flexible. But when that is translated into case handlers in NORAD and case handlers in Norwegian Church Aid, it can get very complicated, and the flexibility is not there anymore. So how to build in more, to be adaptive, the safe space I was talking about, and in the tech world you have fail fast, but here we don't dare to talk about but it's everything is a finding, and I think that is just the thing about the way of working.
Thank you. And then we want to hear from Ornella. What are your thoughts after hearing all these inputs? Do you have anything you want to finish with?
Well, I think this conversation has been extremely rich. I take away the points that were made on the need to have a much more open conversation. And again, I think this takes us back to the need to rethink what this means in programmatic terms, in the ways the partnerships are built, in the ways the reporting requirements are made, and in the kind of incentives that are included in contracting and in day-to-day management. I also think the points that were made about the costs are extremely relevant. It's a matter of, walking the talk and really trying to be more consistent in actually following up with the appropriate means for the type of setup we want to see. So working in complex environments that are remote, that require intermediaries, that require remote management and monitoring and so on, is expensive, is risky, is challenging. So the question, I guess, for Norway as a humanitarian donor here would be, well, how much of this risk are you willing to take, and how exactly will this translate in your practices?
Thank you very much, Ornella. And just to sum up, I think we've heard a lot of, we have maybe some new thoughts and new reflections on both conflict sensitivity and contextual knowledge and localization today. And I believe that the questions we asked at the initiation of this seminar now has been answered with some new thoughts and reflections and suggestions, and maybe even some new questions, because these are real dilemmas and really difficult things, but we need to continue reflecting upon them. And we believe that research and evaluations are both important input to answer such questions, while also can create an arena for reflections about such difficult dilemmas and questions. Arenas such as this seminar today. So we believe that evaluation also provides other relevant lessons for the aid administration to improve its engagement in other similar contexts. Thus, we encourage all of you to read the full report, which is available on our website. And finally, I would like to thank all of my colleagues that have worked in organizing this seminar, and you in the audience for coming, and the panelists. Please give them all a big applause. And thank you very much.
Thank you.